Hello and welcome to Crossroads. Thank you for joining us again, like every month, to talk about intelligence and what parts of sciences help us answer questions about its mechanisms and mathematics. This talk series is run by CrossLabs, a research institute that I'm leading in Tokyo and Kyoto, aimed at understanding the mind through computational research. So we explore ideas about brain science, information science, AI, artificial life, and how they can enable new technologies and positive changes in society. The crossroads means that we bridge across many disciplines of mind intelligence, and we're supported by AI company Cross Compass in Japan, working in technologies in manufacturing, gaming, and other. And this is our monthly fun forum on the sciences of mind and intelligence. And as usual, this event will be in three parts. First, we're starting with a talk by our guest speaker here on YouTube. And it's going to be followed second by a Q&A session. So you can post questions through the link we'll be posting here in the comments. And finally, we'll invite you all to continue the chat on Zoom off stream. And today, we have a very special topic. It's going to be about cheating in the future of games, in particular chess. And maybe a word of context first. The world of chess, especially for competitions, has been very affected by a lot of drama lately. And especially with the Grandmaster Hans Niemann being accused of cheating by world champion Magnus Carlsen in the Sinquefield Cup. And Magnus withdrew essentially from a match. And again, in a rematch, he withdrew after just playing one move. And yeah, there has been a lot of drama around this. Magnus accusing more or less, and then more than less directly Hans of cheating, saying he hopes truth comes out, whatever it may be. So chess.com just released a report, actually, and we didn't know when we were organizing this this event, but saying that Niemann, in summary, likely cheated more than 100 times in online games before or until 2020, and Hans denied cheating over the board, but admitted cheating in the past online, just to be clear. And at CrossLabs, we are really excited about, not about the cheating really, but about the consequences and how to predict the future of games, not only board games, also video games in general. And we are doing research about the future of science and technologies, I guess, related to games and open-ended game design as well. And in the face of new technologies that allow for cheating very easily, effortlessly, really, and that can be done just over a few moves in chess, we are interested in knowing how the whole field, not only chess, but I guess all games will evolve, and what tools we have. And we today are really happy to welcome our speaker, Ken Regan. Ken Regan is a full professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Buffalo, the State University of New York. And he's also an IM, an international chess master. He writes a very nice blog together with Richard Lipton, which I strongly recommend. It's called Gödel's Lost Letter. Maybe he will mention it a bit later. And he also co-authored a very nice book on quantum computing, quantum algorithms via linear algebra, a primer with same Richard Lipton. And Ken, very, very welcome to Crossroads. We're glad to have you here. You also work on complexity, and your thesis was actually on the separation of complexity classes at the University of Oxford under Dominic Welsh, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
We are excited to hear so many things, not only about your work in chess, but also the larger scope, I guess, of all this, and maybe some complexity theory, maybe some quantum as well. We are looking forward to this. And yeah, whenever you're ready, the screen is yours.
So thank you very much for having me on. Let's see, I'm not quite sure. Are you seeing my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is fine. I'm not going to necessarily go full screen. Let me know if you would like me to. Okay, so I'm
I
going
think
to,
I think it would be nice if you don't mind going full screen. I think we'll get a
Okay.
better view.
Okay,
And
all
don't
right.
forget to hide maybe the little thingy
Hide the
at
thing
the
at the
bottom
bottom.
so
There
we
we
can
go.
see everything. Good.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me for this talk. I want to note, by the way, that a lot of my computational power comes from my university's Center for Computational Research, which gives me 1,000 core bandwidth for free computer time for research purposes. And a lot of that has been used to do the legwork for this model. What I've decided to emphasize at the beginning, though, is actually the application, the statistical nature of the application. So I actually have a pretty garden variety predictive analytic model. And what that means is that the model addresses a series of events or decisions that have possible outcomes. And it generates for each outcome a probability of that outcome. And if there are associated losses or gains from those outcomes, it'll project those based on the probability and the amounts for that outcome. And importantly, predictive analytic model also gives you confidence intervals for those projections and those quantities. So for example, an insurance company may estimate that the probability of your house having flood damage in a 5-year period is 10% with 95% confident that it's between 5% and 15%. Well, what does that even mean? Okay, so what it means is that if you have 100 homes in similar independent locations, independence an important word there, then the insurance company on average sees 10 of them get flooded within the 5 years, and 95% of the time they don't see more than 15, but no better than 5 from their point of view. Okay, so that's what these projections are based on empirically. And now, if the homes are not independent, if they're close together, there's a basic rule of statistics saying it doesn't affect the expectation. I mean, if you get a storm that hits all the homes, that's bad, but no worse than the storm on any one home in terms of probability. And if you don't get a storm, then a lot of those homes get scot-free. So, but the confidence interval, the variance in your projection, yes, that does go wider because you're either dealing with a bunch of flooded homes or not. Those are all things one has to take into account of analyzing chess moves, because I'm in this situation where the outcomes MJ are the possible moves in chess positions. And the most neighboring application in the wider world to think of is where the MJ are possible answers on a multiple choice standardized test, because essentially that's what chess is. Okay, now, if the situations that I'm dealing with can be assumed to be independent, that's a big if, then you can replace the probabilities by z-scores, which work in aggregates over several of these decision events. Okay, and they're kind of like the statistical version of logarithm. What it represents is the natural frequency of yay much deviation. Okay, so in the homes and flooding example, okay, so if I said I had a 95% confidence interval of 5 homes, meant the standard deviation was 2.5 homes. And so 15 or more homes getting flooded when 10 was the expectation would be a z-score of 2. And that's about 1 in 44 chance, a little under 2.5% probability. Z equals 3 means an event of unlikelihood, as saying 17.5 homes get flooded. Z equals 4 means 20 or more homes getting flooded out of random homes in any period. And aside from global warming, if you assume normal weather, it's a 1 in almost 32,000 frequency. Okay, so Z over 6 sigma deviation would be having 25 people cash in your insurance policy. You'd certainly be losing money then. And these z-scores are like Richter scores. It's not the case that z equals 6 is just a little more than z equals 5. That increment matters a lot. And this is a picture of the standard bell curve. So for chess, when people are cheating, we can use a one-tailed test. We're only going to be worried about whether they're making more moves toward a computer than usual, not less. Okay, so and so if you have a z-score of 1.645, then that represents this purple share of the probability. Okay, and the question is how to interpret the resulting unlikelihoods, the small fraction of probability from a z-score of a certain magnitude. Okay, now one thing that allows us to use the standard bell curve to begin with is if you assume that chess moves are independent, they're not, but I'll get to that in a moment, then since the type of cheating test I'm doing is saying on average, how often does the player match a computer, or on an average, how much error do they make? What is the average center-point loss, as the term goes? Then I can apply a central limit theorem, which says that for these aggregates, for any probability distribution D, if you take the expectation of n independent samples, then that distribution becomes more and more like the bell curve as your number of samples goes up. There is, on an ad hoc basis, the question of how rapid the convergence is. And this came about 2 centuries ago from the idea of averaging over n trials of any scientific measurement. The usual convention is to demand n equal 30 at least for this to kick in, but you can shade it. I had a doctoral student use n equal 15, 3 different sets, and that was okay. In chess, however, with human subjects research, you often have to have small sample sizes, but with chess, I have many, many moves for my training. For an individual player, however, though, then what I really want to have is at least 50 moves, okay? Another fact of it is that the chess moves are not all drawn from the same distribution. If I gave the same position to 50 chess players, then of similar rating, then I could regard their moves from the same distribution. What also makes this a funny application, and then there are chess positions in between, and most of the interesting positions are in between. But even so, I find that the character of a chess move stays enough that numbers as low as n equal 50 are reliable enough in my test. But if you're familiar with election polls, from a typical 9-game chess tournament, when I might get 100, 200 or so moves, I'm definitely living with only a fifth of the typical sample size of a good election poll. And that makes life more difficult for me. Okay. Now let's see. So how do I use these z-scores? Now there's a factor, a trap that one can fall into. And this is the need to focus on what really are unusual events. So suppose you just hit a golf ball into the fairway, and the golf ball will come to rest against a particular blade of grass. Okay. Now, that blade of grass, for you to try to reproduce that shot would be a more than 1,000,000 to 1 odds against. But the blade of grass is not an important data. All the blades of grass in the fairway for a certain distance are interchangeable as far as you're concerned. Some shots might be more likely or unlikely or others, but you use the whole range of shots. And similarly with the bell curve, the z-score stands for the whole tail of shots that are at least as unlikely as the one you made. Okay. Now, the z-score itself, that area of the curve, is what I call face value odds. And those odds are going to seem long, but they're going to have to be abated against other considerations. So again, I said a z-score of 2 stands for a natural frequency of about 1 in 44. Z equals 3, natural frequency like 1 in 750. Z equals 4 was the 32,000 I mentioned before. Z equals 5, 1 in 3.5 million. Where you get in trouble is when you want to try and turn these around and use the inference of unlikely probability ahead of time from the natural frequency. And that's where you have to temper your deduction against the issue of Bayesian prior, the look elsewhere effect, and even possible selection bias in your sample. Okay, so the idea, for instance, is if we get a z-score of 5, then we're saying the natural frequency of that performance was 1 in 3.5 million. It's tempting to say the odds were 3.5 million to 1 against it happening, but you run into danger if you're talking about a particular blade of grass, and especially if more than one golfer is taking the golf shots that you're measuring. Okay, all right. So now let's interpret what I'm saying back in our homes and flooding example. Okay, so I had a 2 sigma of 5 homes and expectation of 10. So 100 homes being flooded is 90 divided by 5. That's a Z of 18, beyond astronomical. However, if all the homes are together and a big storm comes, well, we saw that in Florida last week. Okay, so there's one problem is the home risks not being independent. Now, the character of chess moves is like if you have your homes spaced 10 kilometers apart in a straight line from the south of to the north of Japan. Okay, now, on the one sense, 10-kilometer apart are pretty independent as far as the nature of the neighborhood the home is in. But if you get a typhoon, then partly depending on the angle of the typhoon, a large number of homes may be in dependent danger or not. So it's like that with chess moves. Chess moves, and if one home is in danger, then its neighbors to the north are the ones likely to be in danger. But a typhoon affecting Osaka is very unlikely to have effects felt in Sapporo. So with chess moves, it's adjacent moves that have dependence, but it's a sparse dependence with an exponential decay. And don't worry about dependence between games that's caused by games being book moves from opening books known already, because those get removed from my sample anyway. So different games you really can assume are independent. And then for the adjacent moves, because it's adjacent moves that are dependent, the covariance matrix is banded. It's called the Toeplitz matrix, and it's okay to make very similar to if I were reducing my, say, 200 moves down to 170. Okay, so reduces the sample size. And this is what I report, and I've done empirical trials over presumably honest data that also quantifies the magnitude of the adjustments to the z-scores that I make. So given that I said this, we'll make our life really easy by assuming that chess moves are independent so that you can reason what's going on as if they were independent rolls of many-sided dice. So it's not quite true, but I've made an adjustment and verified it by millions of resampling trials of different samples of games, creating what I call Frankenstein players. Namely, I take, say, for 9-round tournaments, I'll take 9 games randomly from my training set, take one side of each game, and put those 9 different human players into one, call them Frankenstein, and then I compute the z-score for that. And I take the distribution of all these random Frankenstein players and make sure that with this adjustment, they conform to a standard bell curve. That's what makes my test safe to use. Okay, so these are the 3 goals for this kind of testing. are you want the model to be sensitive here in chess, meaning if someone really is cheating and causing a high deviation, the model will register a high z-score for that player. Okay, so it's called avoiding false negatives, avoiding type 2 errors. The model is sound is the converse. If every z-score judged abnormally high actually does correspond to a factual high deviation. That's called avoiding false positives or avoiding type 1 errors. And now, a third term, and this is really different from the other three, the model is safe if over presumably honest population, the z-scores it gives follow a normal distribution. And that's what I've guaranteed with my resampling trial. In actual fact, I'm a little conservative, and you want to be conservative within the z greater or equal to 2 high end of the standard curve. Now, it's possible for models to be safe without being sensitive. I could just make random z-scores, pull them out of a hat. They would be safe, they would conform to the bell curve, but they wouldn't catch cheaters. So the whole game for me has been to preserve the safety of my model while ratcheting up the sensitivity. And that actually has been very difficult. Okay. And even when a model is safe, outliers can still happen. You still have some false positives, but you want to contain the rate of those false positives. Okay, now let's see, I'm coming up to, so I'm coming within the original half-hour window. But I have a few more slides that are going to stop at a comparison with cancer and COVID, having to do with interpreting results. So suppose we get a z-score of 4. Okay, so 1 in 32,000 natural frequency. Can we conclude that that means the result is unnatural? No, not so fast. There are the 3 factors we need to bring in. We need to bring in the prior rate. So first of all, obviously, if you're invigilating a chess tournament where nobody could possibly be cheating, because maybe as Hans Niemann offered, they were all playing naked, okay, then a z-score must be a rare but natural event. However, if, on the other hand, you've already found some cheaters in this tournament or neighboring tournaments, chances are you caught another. Okay. And however, if this is one player out of a 500 player open, then you come to the look elsewhere effect as well. I took 500 cracks at the cherry. I took 500 golf shots from the tee. And I got a 32,000 to 1 deviation. But actually, the naive way of estimating the odds of that is just to divide this number by that one. It's a 1 in 60 chance, and that's not so unlikely. Okay, so that's a difficult crack in the middle. So what actually happens is you need to know a little bit more about the context of your situation, how many people you're comparing against. And one of the funny things about quantum mechanics, my other métier, is that Bayesian reasoning and context actually seems to matter to the fundamental working of nature. Okay, so this is where I'm actually starting to come to my stop. So let's see an example in context. So this is a famous example. Stop me if you've heard it before. So suppose you take a test that's 98% accurate for a cancer that affects 1 in 5,000 people, and you get a positive. So what are the odds that you have the cancer? Okay, well, you might think, oh, 98%, because the test is 98% accurate. But it's not the same as the odds the test result is wrong, because it's the fact of the real world that what matters. And what matters is give the test to 5,000 people, including yourself. This is a way of laying Bayesian reasoning flat. Now, of 5,000 people, you expect 1 to have the cancer, and let's just say that result is automatically positive. But out of 5,000 people at 98%, you're going to get 100 false positives. Okay. And all you know is you're one of 101 positives. So you just know you're one of 101 positives, only one who has the cancer. So your odds are actually still 100 to 1 against your having it. What the test did was divide your prior odds by 50, but it didn't mean that you were 98% likely to have it. Okay. So that's why people get a second opinion. And the relevance of this analogy is that 1 in 5,000 is about the frequency of finding an entry player in a tournament cheating in that tournament, or at least attempting to cheat. So now, from a 98% test, that's like getting z equal 2, basically. Certainly not nearly enough when the prior likelihood is 1 in 5,000. Okay. And in fact, if your z equal 2 near the academic standard of significance were your criterion, then you'd be jugging 10 people out of every 500 player open. So one thing is for chess cheating detection, you need a standard much higher than the academic standard. You need a standard like 99.993%. So suppose our cancer tests were 600 times more accurate, 1 in 30,000 error. That's the face value of a z equal 4 result. Well, you still got a 1 in 6 chance of a false positive among 5,000 people from the look elsewhere effect. Okay. So in a 500 player open, like I said, it's a 1 in 60 chance. If that were the only chess being played in the world, it's still a 1 in 60 chance, and that's not quite comfortable satisfaction of the result being unnatural. Okay, so I've argued before the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne, and they have a recommended criterion below proof beyond reasonable doubt, but above balance of probability, called comfortable satisfaction. And in chess, I interpret that as saying that at the end, after all is threshed out, you want to have the odds against the null hypothesis of fair play being somewhere between 100 to 1 and 1,000 to 1. If they're longer than 1,000 to 1, you're less likely to make an error, but you're also not going to catch enough cheaters. And if they're shorter than 100 to 1, then the cost of your making an error, human rights, accusing someone unjustly, outweighs the likelihood. So that's and the sweet spot of this, I think, is the 99.5%, 200 to 1 odds against the null hypothesis. That's the same criterion used by an American elections to call elections by decision test headquarters. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to say before turning it over to Q&A is that the interpretation, though, does depend upon the ambient rate. So suppose instead of a 1 in 5,000 cancer, we have a 1 in 50 COVID, 2% local positivity. Now we still have 100 false positives among the 5,000 people, but now among 5,000 people, 1 in 50, you've got 100 with COVID. So it's become a 50-50 coin flip. Now, this is a negative from the test. Still does a good job of filtering the population. Okay, so it's good for airline companies to use it, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what to do if you get a positive on the test. Okay, now, if the factual positivity rate is 20%, though, now your positive is pretty much indicative of the disease. So this is actually my last slide before questions. So now let's say we get z equal 4 in online chess, where the observed cheating rate is closer to 1 in 50 than 1 in 5,000. And that's been my experience during the pandemic. And if we do this for 30,000 people, okay, we'll have 1 false positive result from the z equal 4 test, but 600 factual positives. Because one thing the chess.com report says is it says that there's a really gnarly large number of people who have been cheating. They admit that. So now that gives you finally 600 to 1 odds against the null hypothesis. Okay, and this is within that range. In fact, you can use z equal 3.75. That still leaves me at my sweet spot. It's okay for that, but if the rate falls under 1%, which maybe things were doing toward the end of the pandemic as cheaters were weeded out, then that would put you right on the edge of your comfortable satisfaction range. Okay, so, and one thing about it too, is you don't have to worry about how many of the factual positives were tested. You just need a good estimate of how many there are. Okay. And so the two takeaways that come out of this is that, first of all, there's not a single threshold to use in cheating detection because it depends on the application. Is it online or offline? What's the likely prior rate? And then the second point from my point of view as a test designer is that soundness, avoiding false positives, and sensitivity, avoiding false negatives, really are different design criteria. And it comes into play because I actually do get a lot of borderline results. Okay, so at this point, that's the parameters under which my application operates, and I do give verdicts, and they are acted on. The other thing I should say about the World Chess Federation FIDE is that there are two thresholds. This, what I'm talking about, would be a threshold for judgment. So for online chess, I argue for z equal 4. They actually use z equal 4.25 for more safety. And for over-the-board chess, I think you need z equal 5 or at least z equal 4.75. So that's the parameters. But there's a second threshold. If you have other evidence, such as if you've seen strange player movements or spectator movements or something physical on the person of the player, then there's a lower threshold of 2.50, just 1 in 160 prior odds, because the presence of something else distinguishing the player reduces the look elsewhere effect and also reduces the prior odds, because the rate of players of strange behavior who have cheated is much higher. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and throw open the Q&A because I can get to more factors. But I've kept my talk general, non-chess, and this is the quite general situation of someone using predictive analytics to render judgments of possible systematic deviation or against natural chance. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken, for this really look under the hood of your predictive model, and a model that can not only be used for chess, but also other games and other situations. I like the examples that you gave here. I hope this gives more context to people trying to understand really the statistics here. And yeah, this has been very mediatized, and I think at Crossroads we want to give some clarity. So we're really glad to have this discussion today. Yeah, maybe a good thing to go over. So let's get some discussion going. Then we can go into some questions from the audience. Maybe let's underline the differences between the work you did here and the work in the report by chess.com, right? So chess.com is dealing only with online data. That means they also have more basically sensors. They have information about window, how if you switch windows, right, between the application and something else, you have timing that you don't have, that you're not using, that would change completely the kind of conclusions you can reach. Would you like to say a word about that?
Well, in fact, I'm going to throw a question back at you. For any of you who have read the chess.com report, did you see any of the terms in the lecture that I just gave reflected in that report. P-value, z-score, confidence interval, selection bias, unlikelihood, any of those terms.
That's right. No, they use very different terms, and there could be have been two reasons for that. For clarity, of course, maybe they didn't, but also there were legal reasons, possibly.
That could be, but it's maybe not what they would be presenting to a jury if this goes to court. Whereas my methods are designed to stand before Cass Lausanne. Okay. Now, the other reality, though, is that having a huge amount of data. So I try to earn my living on 4 to 9 games in a chess tournament with small sample sizes. Whereas chess.com, there are millions of games played per day. So now, are you seeing the Gödel's Lost Letter blog right now? I didn't unpresent, right? Are you seeing this?
Yeah, we can show that.
Okay. So this is an article I wrote called The Doomsday Argument in Chess. If you've heard of the Doomsday Argument, it actually comes up in the chess cheating work, and I can go into that more. But what I want to note from this article is what covers a lot of the lacks online is just the sheer amount of data they have. Millions of games played per week. And they can therefore do extensive profiling of players. And so it's like 1,000 years of over-the-board chess. The entire record of over-the-board chess is only about 10 million games. Okay, but that happens every few days at chess.com. And especially for fast chess, it's a huge amount of data, and having so much data covers many sins. So that's why it's probably okay. And some of the game sets in Niemann in the report are sets of 50 or 60 games, although the report itself has narrowed it down to maybe 16 or 8 of them. But there are actually more games that could possibly be in question in a lot of those offhand matches. So they do live in a data-rich environment, whereas my work has been making do with smaller and smaller sample sizes because people want to nip possible cheating in the bud earlier in the tournament.
So how much, and maybe that's something that we should clarify as well, how much, I guess, sin has to be made or committed to for it to be detectable? So I'm speaking of number of moves, I guess. If we don't have access to all this other rich data, what we have over the board is until we implement better clocks, or we at least record movies for the final games of a competition. We are playing with a few moves that are maybe 3 moves are enough to win a game. Maybe 2 moves, maybe one. What's the limit for your model and for other models?
Right. So Viswanathan Anand reliably, I think he got it right, said that just getting one bit of information at a desired juncture in the game, like does my sacrifice work, is worth 150 rating points. And I think the true number is closer to 150 than to 100 or 200. Okay, so I won't be able to detect that. I can do a back of the envelope argument that says for a 6-game tournament, I might be able to catch cheating on 3 moves per game if they really move the needle, if they're not obvious moves. And or a 9-game tournament cheating on 2 moves per game. Okay. But and that's just based on coin flip model. So that there are some steps I've taken to upweight critical positions where cheating might be judged more likely to occur. But that has not been a great success. And also in the pandemic, the cheating tended to be of the mindless every move variety. And clumping the the weights, created a less uniform distribution of weights, and that actually increased the denominator of my z-scores. So it wasn't as effective as using the simple unit weights model.
Right. That's would be very interesting to compare the results of, well, your model or others with I guess human perception. And when when a grandmaster comes to you and says with their experience, with number of hundreds of ELOs, higher, maybe thousands in my case, higher than me, come with a very strong opinion that this move was so difficult to find that this has to be a bot move. What is the discrepancy between what is the precision of this kind of observation? And is the perception reliable at all?
No, I usually shot those down. There was one case a few years ago where I was able to demonstrate that no chess engine preferred the difficult move. The move that the grandmaster liked, that the grandmaster thought suspicious. And it is difficult. That's the only way I can weigh in on those moves, because it's so small data. I did mean to say that the chess.com report, one of the early sections, begins with a lot of claims about the selectivity of its cheating system, like spends a page and a half on it, but then doesn't offer anything in what follows to substantiate it. So I'm actually quite in the dark about what makes their scheme selective. What makes mine selective is weighting positions according to the hazard, the amount at stake, the expected loss. And that is the way that AlphaZero would weight positions, based on its own calculation of the points expectation curve and how it projects the greater likelihood of making a poor move. There's a second principle that I have used, which is that, so the reality is that computer chess evaluations change minute by minute, second by second, as the search progresses to higher depths. And my student, Tamal Bishwash, found that the phenomenon of good values at smaller depths causing people to be more likely to play poor moves was about 5 times as high as I expected it to be. And so that has become a major feature of the model, but it was also a very difficult feature to tame. So my model has a lot of chaotic dynamics in it. And if people are interested in model building, I can go into some of these details.
Interesting. And for sure, there are some of the not these analytic models, but rather generative models of in chess engines that are able to replicate different parameters, replicate human-like moves by having different knobs that you can adjust that would correspond to something that is more or less human. And I think in the future you could even take a bunch of games and inform your engine to adjust it, not only to be and it wouldn't be all that hard just to clarify to our audience, if you want to, you can design moves that are not only good but also look like they're human-like. And that
could be very important. So there's a detachment in my model that I've emphasized in my talks, especially my early talks. So for instance, if you're trying to forecast marathon running times, then what you will do is you will use a runner's past times, the outputs, to estimate the future results as inputs, to estimate future results. Whereas in my setting, I can separate the output predicate from the input. So ideally, what my model should do is it should use a panel of engines, Stockfish, Komodo, engines with different settings, the human settings or whatever. And those generate the projections, the probability PIs. And now that's completely separate from the tests that I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to identify a subset of moves. And to make this clearer, I'm going to talk about the set of knight moves, K-N-I-G-H-T. So a famous computer scientist named Mario Szegedy, Hungarian-American, set me the task. Can you tell whether my countrywoman Judith Polgar moves her knights more often than other players do? And of course, he's thinking, women likes the horsies or whatever. But what I found, in fact, is that all players move their knights more often than my vanilla model says they do. And so that means I can test any set of moves, the knight moves. I'm not using my inputs to test that set of moves. So I can use inputs from like 20 different computer engines and test the moves of any one of them for concordance, whether players agreeing with any many more than one engine. So ideally, my model is set up that way. And it might turn out that if I use a human setting of an engine as input, I might get better predictions because it more closely models how human beings perceive moves. However, my efforts along this line have been frustrated by the difficulty of model averaging because of an example of what I call a well-motivated correspondence that has a flaw you can drive a truck through. So animating a lot of what you're saying is the idea that the evaluation of a chess position, how many pawns ahead or center pawn someone is, should correspond to the likelihood of that person winning the game. And Amir Ban, an Israeli computer scientist, co-author of the Deep Junior Chess Program and co-inventor of the USB flash drive, wrote a neat paper arguing that in order to maximize the learning rate, chess programs should make their evaluations correspond to the points expectation curve. But there are two problems with that. One, the points expectation depends upon the rating of the player to begin with. So Carlsen is more likely to convert a 1-point advantage against Carlsen than your club player will convert it against an equally rated club player. So I call that the sliding scale problem. But number two, the number two issue is that you could take a chess program and post-process any rank-preserving transformation of its numbers. You can stretch them and bend them. And as long as you preserve the ranks, you're not going to change how the chess program plays, but you can completely destroy the correspondence to the win expectation curve. And in fact, chess engines do this. The Houdini website says they use calibrated evaluations. And this post-processing, if I don't know how to undo it, really destroys my attempts to model average engines. If I model averaging their value, they're sometimes doctored values. And I've written a couple of articles about this. So between that and the sliding scale problem, there's no common reference point. So to deploy something, I'm building my model separately with each engine. But to come back to it, you are right. So I'd like to know the general audience, have they encountered this kind of logistical problem in other AI applications?
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. So by the way, feel free to ask questions at the link that is in the comments. And maybe let's take one first question. So does trying to catch a novice player increase the difficulty since they would have possibly more noise around their behavior? What do you think? Is that easier or more difficult? Does it depend on the engine?
Number one, it is true that if you look at my 2011 AAAI paper, there's lots of noise below 2000, and I don't even go below 1600. Recently, I've been able to calibrate my model on ratings below 1500, but even then there's a lot of noise. Like in my chess-based training data, a lot of the ratings are German ratings, and the German rating system is 100 points adrift of the FIDE international system. But with, and my Z-score adjustments, by the way, go up below 1500 for the most part, empirically justified. So I'm sensing the noise, but I'm also adjusting my parameters accordingly for safety. It does make me less sensitive. However, a novice player does give me more headroom, because if a novice player is rated 1300 but cheats with the computer at 3000 level, that's 1700 points of headroom, a lot more than if 2700 rated Hans Niemann cheats with the computer at 3000 or 3100 level. Or Igor Zrauzes, the Latvian grandmaster, caught 3 years ago, for that matter. So it cuts both ways.
Very interesting. Yeah. Is there a discrepancy between ways that people cheat, and can we detect the differences between ways of cheating?
So it's a question of to detect difference. I don't really quite. I mean, it's just a case of how that impacts the frequency.
I guess it could be different engines and levels, but that's what you just covered now. I'm guessing frequency would be different ways of doing that. What other important degrees? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have court cases where the person was cheating on only about 30 to 40% of the moves. So,
yeah. We have another question about statistical analysis. So I would love to watch all these statistical analysis while watching a game online. Is this viable to do in real time? And yeah,
now, okay,
the amount of competition you need and the one you
this
can
is a
do.
great question. So while watching online, you can get the evaluations of the moves, because Stockfish is usually running in a window. You don't get the probabilities of moves. However, I've heard that from time to time, betting on chess moves has been legal and implemented in Germany. So if you were betting on chess moves, then you would want to see the bookies' odds. And what distinguishes my model is that I give the kind of probability projections you need for betting. And I have internal evidence, so I'll show my screen again, that my projections are usually accurate within 4% on average, and most of the time accurate within 8%. It's a 8% in a relative sense. So if I say 8% in a relative sense, if my model says a move is 50% likely, then it's 8% of 50. It's going to be, my projection will be accurate within 4 percentage points most of the time. If it's an unlikely move, 10%, it'll be 8% of that, basically 1 percentage point up or down. And if it's a blunder, given an unlikely individual probability, my relative error is very close to that. So to measure this, I adapted a Breyer statistic advocated by Sir David Spiegelhalter in the United Kingdom. And so I turned it around from, he's using it to test the accuracy of a forecaster or of a medical diagnostician. But if you know the error rate of your model ahead of time, then you can turn his thing into a Z-score and use it as another cheating test. And so this is based on an error model. So what happened, this came out of a seminar I ran with grad students in my department 3 years ago. And I use first one's an absolute error model on the probabilities. This is a relative error model on the probability. Number 3 is an inverse of that. Then these logs are likelihoods. So this is an absolute error model on the likelihood, and this is a relative error model on the likelihood. And what came out empirically is that my model's projections favor model 5 distinctly about the others. And given error parameter, it's about 4%. So I put an update in this article. So that tells me that that my predictive model is really applicable. The projections are reliable to implement online betting or to bet accordingly. So that's what I'm taking the questioner as saying that he or she would like to be able to have, to view online chess while looking at the probabilities of moves. Now, there is one implementation of this by Sasha Starr, who does broadcasts for Pod TV that I and Grandmaster Mikhail Marin and Master Jim Eady and Grandmaster Suat Atalik have often appeared in. And so he runs betting competitions where in real time you bet on the moves of a fast, rapid game. He even had Alexei Shirov and Pavel Elyanov. These are very well-known chess players, stage such a game, and people take part in betting. So this is certainly doable, but I don't know of any interface that provides it apart from these venues.
One question that comes to mind, because you showed the different variants of the model, is how sensitive different parameters of in the utility function, Gibbs multiplier, other parameters, how important each of those are in your model, especially compared to other models or other possible models, right? You have to make choices.
I have 43 parameters. So let me show another thing about my model, but only 2 of them really have effect. So the main 3 parameters in my model are, they are what I call sensitivity, and that is the beta on a standard log linear model. And it's a necessary parameter, even if you just take the view that I'm taking values that are centipawns and outputting probability. So you need some parameter to divide out the centipawn units. So, okay, then, and what that parameter really controls is the sensitivity of a player to small differences in the values of moves. Okay. Then there's an exponent I call consistency. So this is an article on the blog where I use fresh data from the London 1883 tournament. This was just before the London World Championship match started. And I cover my relation to the standard multinomial logit model, which won the Nobel Prize in Economics for Daniel McFadden and gives you softmax. So the beta parameter is what comes out as the exponent of softmax. So that's a necessary parameter. But it turns out if you just do that, then in my chess application, I get lousy results because my chess application has a lot of cross checks. And in particular, you badly misforecast the frequency of the second and third best moves if you train it on the best move. Now, so anyway, so the second element is I raise my utility function, this delta is the utility loss function, to a power C, which I call consistency. And what that does is it represents a player's ability to avoid getting blown up in tactical minefields, to avoid making errors in very tactical positions. So it governs the unlikelihood of a poor move. Okay. And when you give the, so if you use a log linear model with the C parameter, it actually makes things worse. However, what my model actually is, it's a double log linear model. We use a machine learning textbook that's 970 pages long, has log linear model everywhere. It has log linear model as a footnote to one caption on one page. However, that's what my model is. It's log linear. So the probability of the jth move is the probability of the best move raised to the exponent of the utility function, not raised to the utility function itself as with a log linear. Okay, or multiplied by it. So this creates a lot of double exponential chaotic dynamics, but it gets the frequency of the second best move within tolerance. And then from the third and fourth best moves, my model starts becoming really, really good. And that's important in order to be able to gauge the frequency of blunders, which is the most important forecasting thing. Okay, so that, however, so let me finally show the most important post on the blog for understanding the current state of my model. It's an article from a little more than 3 years ago called Predicting Chess and Horses, where I relate the betting application especially, and the fact that I'm trying to predict cases where an inferior move is more likely. And this relates to the novice chess players as well. So here's an experiment from my training sets. There are just over 6,000 positions in my main training set, as it was then, where they're between players rated between 1,000 to 1,200, so real novices. And the positions have many reasonable moves. There are at least 10 moves valued within 25 centipawns of optimum. And nevertheless, the weak players prefer, on aggregate, the computer's best move with a 4.5% plurality over the next best move, and with an enormous plurality over a move that's 9 ranks down. Now, of course, they also blunder more often, so that's why they're weak players. But still, what I conclude from this is that it's not the case that weaker players naturally prefer weaker moves. Instead, what I believe this shows is that weaker players are more likely to be diverted by flashes in the pan, by what I call nudge, in an analogy with a book of that title. So, so with this module in place, I'm able to improve my predictions by about 2.5 percentage points, but there's a caveat. So I guess if other people aren't busting to ask other questions, I could bring in one other major term from AI, and that's satisficing, Herb Simon's great concept. We tried, my student Tamal Bishwash tried to find it in chess. And it's the question of, when do you stop thinking and make a move? When have you seen enough so you're satisfied and able to make a move? So here's an indicative famous chess position from the 2008 World Championship match. And so put yourself as Kramnik, white, saying, can you take black's pawn? Now, the first novice chess player will say, no, black's queen is guarding it. Little better chess player, club player, will say, but after the queen takes it, I can move the rook, skewering the queen to the knight, and I'll win back my knight. Might even get the bishop too. More advanced player says, oh, wait a second. Black doesn't have to move the queen when you attack it with the rook. Black can counterattack my queen. And then I can get black's queen and he gets mine and I don't get the knight, but I can still go down and get the bishop. And now my king's a little bare, but my bishop's covering the back rank. And now I've got these two nice pawns and I'm going to queen one of them. That's what Kramnik thought. Now the computer follows this line of reasoning. For the knight takes d4 capture move, it initially thinks it's bad. This is Stockfish 6. Then at depth 9, it starts thinking, oh, knight takes d4 is the best move. And that continues for a range of depths until at depth 15, Stockfish sees deep enough to see what Anand actually sprung. And Kramnik didn't see it coming until Anand played the move. Knight to this square, putting it in take. But after black captures back, white cannot stop this pawn from becoming a queen. and white's rook is too out of play to do anything about it. So Kramnik resigned. So
Very nice,
this,
yeah.
so what my model does is use these lower depth values to measure the shiny object. Now this was a deep enough track to catch a world champion. There are other effects of these values, but now finally a caveat. And so this will round out the social context of my work. I have a hyperparameter. So I tried to make a parameter, a main parameter called depth of thinking, and that parameter just does not behave with the double linear dynamics. And a hint of why it doesn't behave is even shown here. So I have an outside hyperparameter that I hand tune called the gradient, which means the relative importance of lower depth values in the utility function. The higher I put the gradient, the steeper it is, the less impact the lower depth values have. So at 2.5%, my two main model parameters, C for consistency, plotted 20 below to put it on the same sheet, and my sensitivity parameter show a pretty beautiful correlation to rating. Now there's the noise with low rated players that the questioner was talking about. It's quite evident here. And there's also noise of small data because there aren't so many elite grandmaster games either. But in the middle, main rank of players, these is pretty good. Now, I can improve the predictivity of my model by lowering the gradient. And this is a word of caution to AI model designers who say that improving predictivity is the be-all and end-all. Okay, and here's an illustrated position from a game 3 years ago, well-known players, Antoine, former world champion, where white can in fact win by pulling the queen back to F1. And the Stockfish computer sees that that's the best move at the depth I use. But a human player is more likely to play the queen here to F3 because it's more in the center. And it's threatening to come here, which is hitting the rook and hitting checkmate. That's an incredibly powerful threat. Whereas queen F1, the purpose of it is you're going to play C5 and bring the queen in on that diagonal, and that's a little more removed and subtle. But it happens to win and the other move does not. So with my current settings, I think my model's really wrong here. I even said during the St. Kitts Cup broadcast in the chat that I thought Anand was going to play queen F3. So if I were actually real-time betting on chess moves, I would have bet on queen F3, and that is the move Anand played, and he only drew the game. But my model is says, however, with this setting, it thinks queen F1 is much more likely. This is just wrong. My model's sometimes wrong. Okay. Now, if I lower the gradient a little bit, I don't change the probabilities too much. I get a little better prediction. Only 0.05. It's Bupkis. But already you can see that the correspondence to the C parameter has faltered. It's now only going as high as 0.16. It was up to 0.18 over here. So this slope's fallen down. It's not as strong a correlation. The red's okay. Now, if I put the gradient down more and use lower depth values, now the C parameters fall into 0.14. And at least, however, though, the queen F1 move is under 50% and the queen F3 move is up there. If I put the gradient down this low, now my model says that queen F3 is more likely, the inferior move. But the cost of that is that my C parameter is completely gone flat. I no longer have the strong correspondence to rating. And my sensitivity parameter crashes to 0 for 2,600 and above rated players, meaning I'm getting a really tiny value in my utility function that's in the denominator, so it's a huge multiplier, so I'm getting really bad numerical dynamics. And my position, and I'm eventually going to write an article about this, is that I think that model designers usually design a model one-off for a particular purpose and don't explore the ambient space enough, nor judge the robustness of their model.
Mhm.
So this is the case where I'm running my model at a lower predictivity rate in order
Mhm.
to avoid overheating or overclocking it, and in order to preserve the reliability and sanity of my model's cross-checks and other deductions.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
famous analogy for what I'm talking about, so this will open it to your wider audience, is the early self-driving cars used the neural characterization of road signs, stop signs, and yield signs. And it's pretty good for the stop signs and yield signs that you actually see. But several people, including Patrick McDonald of Penn State, whom I hosted once, discovered that if you just change a few of the pixels in a stop sign, then even though the human eye will still see it as a stop sign, the pixels were in such a place that the particular regressed neural parameters were multiplying it by too much, and it caused the car to misclassify that image as a yield sign with potentially catastrophic results. So in other
Mhm.
words, there is an acknowledged robustness and reliability problem, even with the neural model, let alone my frequentist one. So
Mhm.
that's the other care that I take, is that I do
Mhm.
trade off sensitivity against sanity. And I'd be
Mhm.
interested to hear about that with other people. Okay.
That's very interesting. Yeah, yeah. I guess yeah, and the way you weigh false positives and false negatives really depends on the application. I guess in medicine, it's false positives means it's super scary or could lead to a lot of expenses, but false negative is basically much worse, possibly. So
Yeah.
oh, yeah, you don't have anything to worry about. And same for autonomous driving, different applications like that. In chess, yeah, I guess both are equally important here. Yeah, it's very tricky here. What you bring in the choice of your model and your hyperparameters is that you can capture different notions of tactics versus strategy and maybe finer even, right? And those shiny objects is very so what is the simplest model that you can conceive of that would still capture this shininess of certain patterns for a human player? And yeah, and I think you do have some of it already. Maybe the picture can become clear at maybe a lower expense, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
have
it
to
would
be
make sense
very
to just
careful
evolve
with
automatically
mission
the
creep now.
model,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah,
true. I have to be
very,
very careful with it. It took me 3 years to tame the dynamics. I once hosted Cynthia Rudin of Duke. She used to be an undergraduate at Buffalo. And so she gave me a lot of her time to look under the hood of my model. She said, yeah, you can't deploy it in that state. So that's when I changed to a very heavy-handed way of
right.
modeling this depth. Yeah, so.
Yeah, actually, someone asked a question about using those statistics in different way, whether it was moral, ethical. So, what do you think? So, the question is: assuming betting is moral, ethical, wouldn't these models break betting itself, right? So, if these analyses could apply for example, football odds or betting houses, you can imagine a bunch
Well,
of
you can do
people
that. You can go to 538.com and use its chess ELO rating derived odds for sports events. And
right.
whether I have not heard, however, of anyone beating Las Vegas by using Nate Silver's chess-based ratings. With the betting, I would use my model to set the book, to set the initial line for the book, but otherwise not expose it. And the other thing is my model does take a fairly substantial amount of time to run, especially to run the chess analysis, because you have to run the computer at some sort of comparable time that slow chess players especially are spending on the game. So you're not going to get analysis fast enough to place your bets in 30 in 5 seconds on a blitz game.
Right. Let's take one more question from the audience. Maybe since it is a statistical analysis, it doesn't look like this is chess specific. So maybe that's a good segue for us as well. So is it chess specific? To what extent? I guess it's not at all. So are there limitations to use your method in other types of games?
I deliberately get rid of all chess content. I use only the values of the moves. It does, however, though, need a reliable numerical judge. And that's why my model initially was not really carryable over to Go until AlphaZero came around, because AlphaZero was the first and only AlphaGo and AlphaZero, the first and only engine that could give reliable values for Go moves and Go positions from which to infer utility. So the general nature of the task is bounded rationality. How skilled are people at accurately sniffing out value that can't be objectively assessed in a small amount of time because of the computational complexity of chess? Ah, there we have it. We finally got into my main professional field of complexity theory, and the abstract version of chess and Go both are hard for polynomial space, which means they're NP hard as well. So just, they're difficult games to figure out, and the complexity sets in concretely even for 8x8 chess and 19x19 Go. Nevertheless, if you do have or give you good values, then those inputs can be fed abstractly into my model, and nothing else about the board game needs to be said. You just need to map it to this predictive analytic situation where you have a position, you have the legal moves, you have the values, the hindsight, authoritative values, those feed a utility function, and then you predict the behavior of the player, just like people use utility functions to predict consumer behavior. So you could do this for Go, and there's a particular prediction that I've made. Go does not have the draw issue of chess. So one of the things that I find in chess is if you have a move that's slightly inferior and the value of your position is below 0, then that slight inferiority might actually be significant. It could be a real slippery slope. But if you've got a position where you're half a pawn ahead and you make an inferior move, very often you can skedaddle to achieve a draw by perpetual check or some other way. There's a safety net of a draw in chess that you don't have in Go. And that really causes aberrations in my data. And my prediction is that if you carried my model over to Go, then you would not see those aberrations. So yes, my model should be carryable over to other games, and also more broadly to psychometric tests, to SAT, GRE, standardized multiple choice tests.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I guess one question that our audience may have is how to combine your method. And of course, all of that is within the realm of statistical machine learning, but how would you combine with connectionist, I guess, deep learning kind of machine learning? Is there a way that you would like to go forward?
It could. Many people have said that my model could probably be strengthened that way. And the only caveat I have is that when you go with deep learning, you lose explainability. For instance, no one can say why AlphaZero makes a move. Okay. And the amazing thing about AlphaZero and about all the neural chess engines now is that you can download the neural encoding. It's only 500 megabytes, not even a gigabyte. And that tightly winds all of the processed wisdom of the entire history of chess, all the books, all the human master games, and a lot more wisdom designed for self-play. And that relatively tiny oracle guiding a shallow search can defeat a deep search. And that to me is a really remarkable fact. That knowledge in chess can be wound so tightly, but the price you pay for winding it so tightly is that it's also brittle. Okay, you can't necessarily adapt it to a new situation. And
I wonder how, because I'm as I mentioned before, we had some discussions. I'm very interested in the shiny objects kind of phenomena in general in games, and also in the depth of thinking that you were mentioning. So Go is deeply has this very big discrepancy, a bit larger, I think, than chess, perhaps because of branching factor, but also other dynamics in there between strategy and tactics. And chess still has a difference, I think, between them, but maybe it's slightly shallower.
Go has a much longer horizon for that. And so that would be a really interesting test to see if my, what I call my swing phenomenon operates more strongly in Go. To predict human mistakes at Go. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I guess, and this plugs into something that people have suggested to you, I think, in terms of profiling players and using statistics to do so. And definitely there are different personalities in playing. And when I play chess or Go, I can feel the person in front of me. I feel like in Go, of course, I'm more experienced in Go than chess, but I feel who is in front of me. If I weren't seeing the person, I could guess, oh yeah, this is probably my friend Vincent or my friend Nicholas in front of me. Okay, this kind of move, definitely, this shows this kind of strategic or tactical thinking. What do you think about this, being an international master yourself and also a statistician? Do you see that happening for chess as much, or is there a difference?
I lost a little bit of the thrust of your question. The difference of what?
The difference in profiling, really. If you weren't seeing who is in front of you,
profiling players,
blind, could you recognize the different features of a player in their personality?
Yes. Now I do have my two parameters, I think, do accurately reflect the classic strategy and tactics combination in chess. Okay. But the issue of profiling really, to me, depends on paucity of the data. So I use a central fit. So there are different ways that my two main model parameters and the others can map to a chess ELO rating. I use an averaged value when I take a player's ELO rating for a cheating test and create the corresponding S and C parameters. Now, a player could defend against one of my cheating accusations by saying, I'm really an extreme positional player, so you should use a different trade-off of your parameters to model me. And then I'd have to go and look for 100 games of this player that I could train my model on. And the problem is I don't do it because that's just not big data sound. But I don't do it in advance. Chess.com, however, though, can do what it trumpeted in a newspaper article as its DNA crime scene analysis of every player, because they have huge numbers of games of every players and can fit more parameters without overfitting and gain, therefore, a more detailed picture than I avail of play. So.
Right. I think I want to keep some time for the off-stream discussion as well, so people can join and we can all chat in a Zoom room and share the link in a moment. But before that, I'd like to know what are your thoughts about the next steps here for the chess world, knowing that engines are evolving so quickly and that the rest of technologies interfacing with humans are going to be trickier and trickier to detect. Maybe there is a sort of evolutionary red queen race, right, between detection and cheating. What in the future does chess change in the future? Do we play chess variants? Do we have different policies? What do we do?
I mean, it already comes to that in certain ways. You're not allowed to wear a watch because a watch could have an LCD panel or something. And we wrote rules that said you have to have your cell phone switched off and not carried on your person. It has to be in a bag under your table. We didn't require people to maintain concierges for cell phones because that would be an invitation to chaos for normal large open tournaments. but I don't know. The thing is, of course, you know, I don't have any evidence that Hans Niemann has cheated in over-the-board chess, and I have the opposite of such evidence, a very normal-looking distribution of his results in over-the-board chess. Didn't even get into that. So it may be that this can be confined to a discussion between online and over-the-board chess, where you also have the different prior rate. So I hope that over-the-board chess is not impacted. It is going to cause a greater uniformity in the standards for chess tournaments. But the real reckoning that the chess community has to have now is what is our attitude to players who have cheated online. You know, at a university, academic integrity online versus in person is the same. Okay, but are we able to say that in the chess world? Problem is the university has one jurisdiction for academic integrity. In chess, it's two jurisdictions. It's the online platform for their subscribers and online play versus FIDE and national federations, mostly for over-the-board play. And those two jurisdictions have not been reconciled, but what needs to happen is respect for the fact that a player like Hans Niemann does remain in good standing with FIDE, with the United States Chess Federation, and with the St. Louis Chess Club.
Right. Yeah, I guess the next thing that we're waiting for is a report from FIDE, I guess, and future deep thoughts about where the game should go and future policies. I guess the comparison again with other games, and it may include esports, where you have aiming AIs, right? Like for those kind of games or other helps. Interestingly, in shogi, maybe in Go competition, so I play a bit of Go competitively, and it's very interesting that until very recently, for example, consulting books of joseki or dictionaries of openings or things like that was perfectly fine. You could bring your book, and that was not forbidden. It was almost encouraged for beginners. Okay, yeah, bring your book. You can consult it. It's on your own time, and thinking that time would be the limit. In a way, that brought a different kind of culture. I wonder if there are opposite cultures in different games or board games, and some of them
I wish I knew more about them.
coupled with engines.
I know very little about poker, and I've been on some appearances where the poker cheating scandal has come up at the same time, and that's an argument over one move, one call, all in on one hand, and that just doesn't get into my large data at all. So I don't know. And even within chess, I have to respect that the grandmasters have their own culture of likelihood of moves, as you were saying some time back. And I'm not such an active chess player, so in some sense, I just don't really know.
Yeah, I think this is a very open question, of course, and one attached to that one is we mentioned chess variants. Maybe the game will have to be redesigned to some limited extent in the future. I personally enjoy
opening book.
Right. Yeah, I wonder about the opening books. Are there ways to design games in general, I guess, in a way that they are more resilient to those AIs existing and you being able to use them to a larger extent? Maybe it affects the future designs.
Well, see, so with chess itself, I don't know if I told you this when we met before. I know you're seeing my screen now or yours. Now you're seeing mine. So I'm on a website run by a peer in my field, Hans Bodlenter, computer scientist in Utrecht, Holland, as advocating a non-random, Fischer non-random chess, basically marrying Fischer castling rule with the older baseline chess of Bronstein and Banco.
Right.
And so this is my proposal for chess that I'd like to see people sponsor instead of chess. Chess 960 has some positions that give too much of an advantage to white. And then my effort to make a computer resistant form of chess was something called tandem pawn chess, There's an article about it at ChessBase, actually. And this is where basically everybody starts with 16 pawns instead of 8. The pawns are coupled, and there are rules for how they can uncouple. And that upweights the pawn structure longer term aspect of chess, and maybe therefore makes it more computer resistant. Who knows?
Very interesting. They're coupled in like a sort of intricated, or so they would be dependent on each other's moves, or how does that work? Right.
So coupled. So you can uncouple pawns when you capture. There are various little details, and I didn't even know if I found them. I never played the game, so I don't know which combination works best.
Interesting. Yeah, there are definitely many variants, and we haven't explored all of them. Of course, people are attached to the game itself, and I think it allows for a lot of emergent dynamics already, and exploring those with the valued opponent or friend, companion that shares the game with you is the most valuable thing. Now the competition aspect may have to change without, and maybe we can maintain the game without. Maybe those can go their own ways. I see there are more comments on YouTube and here, but maybe we want to go into a free discussion. So what I'll do is I'll share.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut it short because I piggybacked another person at 10:30, so I kind of forgot about the timing.
Oh, no worries.
I'll try to be on Zoom for a while. Okay, a little while.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. I want to thank you again for your time, Ken. That was really lovely to have you here. And we'll include under the video links to your blog. I must say I really enjoyed reading a few posts there, and it's really well written and really fun to read, especially if you're a computer scientist. So I'll leave the links there, and I want to thank our audience as usual. Thank you so much, and see you on Zoom.
Okay. They're for a little while.